You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we will show you how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus your life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll pull back the curtain so you can implement these tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Ciminillo. Guys, thanks for joining us here on episode 48 of the Reinvest Podcast. We are privileged, Seth and I, to show you guys how to maximize your life through the power of real estate investing. We've got a lot of awesome stuff to jump into today. One of the things we've been talking about on the show is kind of demystifying real estate investing and trying to anchor it in reality. There's a lot of content out there. It's popping up on your news feed, YouTube, kind of the clickbait type stuff for real estate investing, especially after Amazon hears you're talking about it. They start pumping you with ads.
Get $50,000 of passive income in 3 weeks.
It's that easy. So with us today is somebody that I think can help us be grounded into reality, into what it takes, the persistence that will pay off. Andrew Cushman. Andrew, how you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. I think the business is good, and it's spring in California, and I'm here talking real estate. So if I wanted to feel much better, I'd probably have to take something illegal.
That's a good way to say that. Wow, you really like real estate. So what's interesting is, before we jump into the real estate related stuff, you are Southern California, but you're a certified alpine ski instructor. Did I say that right?
Yeah, no, you're right. You got it.
Is there skiing in California somewhere?
Yeah, so I live about 15 minutes north of Disneyland, which means the nearest surfing is about 35 minutes, and the nearest ski resort is an hour and a half.
Wow, that's pretty close.
And I've gone surfing and snow skiing on the same day. So I don't actively teach anymore, just because I've moved on to other things, and I got tired of being handed 15 4-year-olds, which means I'm not actually doing any skiing myself. So that's people ask me all the time, oh, you could live anywhere, why do you live in California? It's like, I can grow anything I want to grow in my yard, I can surf year round, I can ski, and I can tell my son, hey, you're not going to school tomorrow, we're going skiing instead, and just do that from home. And it's if I enjoy the geography, and it's a great place to live.
What kind of pressure does that put on you as a parent living 15 minutes away from Disneyland?
You know what? I'm fortunate they're kind of burned out on it now. Nice. So while they still enjoy it, it's not a constant refrain of, when are we going to Disneyland? So
that's awesome. Yeah, the closest thing we've got is like Cedar Point.
Yeah, we got Cedar Point.
I've been to Cedar Point. Cedar Point's good. Much more fun roller coasters than Disneyland. So.
Yeah, it's kind of the big dog roller coasters, where Disneyland and Disney World are a little bit more tamed and geared towards children. So that makes sense. But so Andrew, you are the the principal and the founder of Vantage Point. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what that is, what you do there?
Wow, we do multifamily syndication. That's all we do. We've opted intentionally not to branch out into self-storage or industrial or car washes or any of that. Not that there's anything wrong with those asset classes or even doing that. We've just decided our goal is to try to be really, really good at one very specific thing, which is garden style multifamily properties between 100 and 250 units in the Southeast United States, class B- to A-. I've done about 2,700 units, currently manage about 1,500. And actually just closed a couple hundred about a month ago. And so, business has been really good. So,
which is interesting, right? So there's deals that are still on the market and available, per the case study of closing a big deal here a couple months ago.
It was an off-market deal, and we looked at 203 other deals that we said no to in order to find that one.
No, so, I appreciate that. And that's going to tie into what we're going to talk to today, is the persistence that it takes to find success in real estate. So we were at the Best Ever conference. I think you were one of the speakers. Mm-hmm. I know you're one of the speakers there. I think I saw you there. And you had shared, it was like a compact, concise, quick-hitting testimonial and kind of your origin story of how you went from the corporate chemical engineering background and got into real estate. So I guess I wanted to give you an opportunity to start there, maybe to share with our listeners what that grit was, even your touch point with real estate investing, and then we'll kind of flesh this out.
Yeah, and I'll give the shorter, more condensed version of that without the all the more dramatic details. But basically, is I got a chemical engineering degree simply because when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to run my own business. I just had no clue how to do that or what that looked like. So I figured, hey, I like chemistry, I like problem solving. I'll get a chemical engineering degree. That way, I'll always have a job and a decent income until I figure out what I really want to do. Did that. Worked as an engineer for 7.5 years. My wife and I discovered flipping. And the flipping that we discovered was based on reaching out to homeowners who were in pre-foreclosure. Now, we discovered this in 2006, and we really dived into it in 2007. And as an engineer, I was not good on the phone, right? And I found this out later, but when my wife and I were dating, she used to make a list of topics so that when she called me, she could keep the conversation going, right? Because, she'd ask an insightful question or something, and I'd give like a 2-word answer and like, okay, well, I'm done. So, I was not a phone guy. And so what did we do? Well, we went into a business that relied on me cold calling people in financial distress and seeing how we could help. And, as you can imagine, if you are having financial problems, you're about to lose your house, you may have lost your job, your relationships might not be in the best shape because of that stress, and some stranger calls you and says, let's discuss your financial problems, you're probably not the happiest to talk to that guy.
Right.
But that's what I chose to do. I went into probably the hardest thing for me to do based on my skill set. So with her coaching me, I'd get off she would listen, I'd get off the phone and she'd be like, okay, honey, that was good, but next time maybe try saying it this way, right? So it took me 4,576 calls in order to get our first deal. 6 months while working full time. So I used to make calls before work, during lunch, after work, up until 9 o'clock at night, weekends, Sundays, I'd be knocking on doors, all that kind of stuff. But we got that first deal in 2007, right at the peak before the crash.
Yeah.
Flipped it as everything was coming down. Basically made as much as I made all year long at my job. And we said, all right, that's it. What else are we going to find better than that? So I quit. We went to flipping full time. She joined 2 years later. And then flipping is great, but it's just another job.
Right.
We wanted to do something that created more wealth, more lasting income, and had a better impact on the community. And so we said, all right, we just had a huge recession. That means we're going to have an expansion. Everyone just lost their house and can't buy a house, or they're scared to buy a house, which means we're going to have a whole lot of renters for the foreseeable future. So what's going to do well in that environment? Probably apartments. Mm-hmm. So found a mentor. He held our hand for the first year. Our first deal was 92 units out in Macon, Georgia. Really glad we did that deal because it was profitable and it got us started, but I would never do that deal again. And then, here we are 2,700 units later.
Wow. So, man, there's a lot there. When you were doing the first flip. So I guess one question that I have is, why were you so sold on flipping that you would make 5,700 phone calls or the 4,500 phone calls that it was? You know what I mean? So,
and this is one of the beautiful things about real estate and why it is an avenue to wealth for the average person. Is that it's not, I know I'm not the guy who's going to come up with the latest, greatest app, right? And have a unicorn company that goes from 0 to $1 billion in 3 years and sell it and, move to the Bahamas. The awesome thing about real estate is there's really nothing new in real estate. It has all been figured out. It has all been done.
Yeah.
All you have to do is find somebody or multiple people who are already successful at what you want to do and just copy what they are doing. So for us non-creative types like me, I didn't have to figure this out. I could look and say, okay, well, I know these other people who are doing this. So there's no question of whether or not will this work. It's simply a matter of, can I execute it? Do I have the skills and the persistence to make it happen? And my wife and we were determined that we were going to make it happen. We said, all right, we will not quit until we get our first deal. If we do our first deal and then we don't like it, fine. We can quit, and that's not a failure. But if we give up before executing, that was failure to us. And so that's what gave us the persistence to get through that. And we came pretty close to the breaking point too. I mean, I can tell you that 6 months was rough.
Wow.
So it took 6 months, 4,500 some odd phone calls, got your first deal, which was a flip, flipped it, made out. I mean, so that was right. You said as things were coming down and you sold it off.
How'd you make money when the market was correcting? I mean, that's wild. You must have got in it pretty good.
And this applies to the current multifamily market and everything else as well. There's no such thing as a bad market, just a bad strategy. So you think of most of the flippers and most multifamily people for the last 5 years, the strategy was just go buy something,
Right.
let the market take the price up, sell it, and celebrate that you did an awesome job, right?
Yeah.
That worked the last 5 years, but that's not the case now, and that wasn't the case back in 2007. So what we would do, and to what you said, I remember our second deal when we walked into the real estate office, because we used a realtor to sell and title company and all that. We walked in the office and one of their top realtors was sitting there. We were like, hey, cool, we're buying another one. We're going to flip it. He literally looked, he goes, are you crazy? I mean, he didn't just, and I said, well, here's what we're doing. We knew prices were dropping really fast. So if a property was worth 400 today, we would buy it for maybe 200 and plan on making it the nicest one in the neighborhood and then selling it for 325 or 350. So we adjusted the strategy of our goal was to buy at 55 cents on the dollar, renovate, and then sell at 80 cents on the dollar. So through 2007, 8, 9, that whole crash, we made money on every flip that we did. And we never took more than 30 days to sell a house, even in the worst of the downturn, because we bought it right and then priced it right on the exit. Everyone was profitable, and we never took more than 30 days to sell. So we changed our strategy. If you tried that strategy the last 5 years of buying at 55, good luck. You might have gotten 1 or 2 houses a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So you couldn't have done that. But back then, that's what you did, and it worked great. We had no competition for 2 years. It was amazing.
Right. That's true. No, that's true. I knew investors that were buying like crazy through that time. And we just had lunch with this individual today. And he was talking about when people have fear, when there's fear in the market, so many people step back. And I think this is what clicked with me today. They're not just like Joe and Sally, who have never done a real estate deal, now feel skeptical. You're talking about proficient business people who have been actively buying real estate, are recoiling and pausing and saying, we're going to wait, or we're going to step back and shore things up. So it's like, that's why when someone says there was no competition or little competition, that's what they're saying. These people are stepping back that were actively buying. Which is wild. And we just haven't seen that yet, but I think we're going to. So, but on that note, right, so people hear, hey, there's nothing new in real estate. It's a formula that you can replicate. Maybe there's a misnomer that it's easy. And I think there's been a lot of, syndication. It's kind of like you said, just go buy real estate in the last 5 years and you were making money.
You were a genius.
And yeah, right. And you think it's probably you were the key ingredient as to why that was happening. So does real estate investing get oversold?
I think it does to some degree, yes. And I think the particular aspect that gets oversold is related to what you just said. Number one, it's not necessarily easy. It can be, but don't count on it. And then second, it's not passive. Someone who thinks they're going to go buy 4 rental houses and then just retire to the beach, it does not work that way, especially if you're self-managing them. So it does get oversold. Now, with that said, the potential is absolutely there. But it's not easy. It takes persistence. It takes education. You have to have the persistence, I guess, to go out and find the right template to execute on, and then have the discipline to follow through in the execution, and then also figure out, well, what part of the market are we in? Because the strategy that worked for 5 years, in multifamily, for example, the last 6 or 7 years, really popular thing to do. Nothing wrong with it. This is what most people were doing, is syndicate an apartment deal, do some kind of light value add, whatever, hold for 2 to 3 years, sell it for a huge IRR, and that worked great, right? And people were just rapidly moving through deals. You cannot do that right now. I would run away from any deal that relied on an exit 2 years from now. Now, 5 or 6 plus years from now, will prices be higher? I think they absolutely will, for lots of macroeconomic reasons that we could discuss. But what that means is, if you're buying now, or even if you're getting into it now as a first timer, you do have to educate yourself to know, okay, we're in this part of a cycle, and we have to adjust and use this kind of strategy versus what everyone was doing for the last 5 years. And that's one of the absolute keys to success, and being able to have a business that functions through all market cycles, right? When you look at some of the most successful real estate businesses and companies, they don't just disappear for 5 years.
Right.
They change their strategy. Now, maybe they're not buying as much right now, but they're still doing something, because they just adapt the strategy. They adapt how they do debt. They adapt how they do equity. They adapt their hold times, all of those things. So it's not easy in the sense of just run out and buy anything anywhere for any price.
Right.
So that gets a little oversold. It's also the passive nature of it gets a little bit oversold, but it is absolutely worth putting the effort into, because to restate, I don't know anything else that is such an accessible avenue to freedom and wealth creation than real estate. I mean, there's so many stories, and you guys have talked to people who come from nothing and have built themselves over 3, 5, 10 years into multimillionaires through real estate. I don't know anything else that most people can do. So yeah, oversold to some degrees, but in others it's true if you put the work in.
Well, and I think that's life in general, is having the right expectations going into it. If you are going to be successful in anything, it doesn't matter if it's a business, if it's a tech startup, if it's a real estate portfolio, you can't treat it like a hobby. You got to treat it like a business, which means there's intention, there's structure, there's a strategy, there's effort, there's resources, so, but all that being said, absolutely, it's poised to be a great way. It's simple, but not easy. And there's things that are complex out there that, like, in order to find success, like, the word derivative makes my head hurt, right? So, like, don't talk to me about that stuff.
Or trying to figure out how to code. I'm going to make a bunch of money by coding a program. I'm just like, that's not simple. You have to learn that.
I have a hard time, like, putting a 6-digit code on my iPhone to keep people out of it, So, absolutely. But one question I have, though, is how do you know the difference between persisting in something long enough to find success versus making a pivot?
That is an excellent thought, and that is one of the trickier aspects of real estate and life in general.
Maybe speak from your own experience in that then.
Yeah, and that's just what I was going to say. I mean, I don't think there is a blanket answer that covers everybody in every situation, but I can definitely speak from our experience. There's a couple aspects of that. One, taking it back to real estate, knowing when to pivot is a question to ask. To answer that question is, well, okay, do I know other people who've succeeded in this? Right. So, for example, I just listened to a podcast where, a guy, he's successful now, but when he started, all of his friends, all of his family members, you're crazy. That's never going to work, right? So should he have listened to those people? Well, he didn't. And one of the reasons he didn't is because he could go out and see, well, no, there's lots of other people that are successful at this. If he had said, well, okay, no one's ever done this before, and everyone who's tried has failed, doesn't mean, that's not necessarily mean you should never try anything new, but okay, maybe that's a sign that it's not quite as, maybe look into it a little more, right?
Right.
So, so the number one thing is, we'll have other people succeeded with this. And again, I'm kind of staying real estate focused. So if the answer is yes, then now it just becomes, well, is it worth it to me to continue with the persistence to make it happen? Or does it get to a point where, where you're like, what, I just don't have the energy for this. Maybe I do want to do something else, and you can pivot. So the question is, it kind of gets back to the motivation of, all right, now we have something that we know it works. So it's not a question of, well, I'm going to try this for 6 months and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. It's just a question of, do my motivations, does my why give me what's needed to continue on with it. And then, so that's kind of the question of, do I, do I continue with real estate or do I pivot out into something else?
Right. So you've got the proof of concept out there,
Yeah.
and now you're answering the personal question of like, what does it mean to me?
Exactly. And then in terms of adapting to the market, that's just education and networking and being adaptable. We pivot strategy. I mean, if you go back over the last 15 years, we've pivoted our strategy many times.
Mm-hmm.
It's all been multifamily, but we've had very different strategies because the market has changed.
Do a flyover on that. Like, so you guys started, that first one was in Georgia. It was a 96 unit. So how has your strategy pivoted over time?
Yeah. So great. There's some good examples in there. So when we started buying multifamily in 2011, it was the best time to buy. As you mentioned earlier, everyone was terrified of it.
Right.
Which means there was no lending. And deals were just, it's like deals were just, I used to seriously, like 3 weeks out, just make a list of 20 properties I was going to look at, make my flight reservations, tell the brokers, all right, I'm going to be out in 3 weeks. We'll do a tour, whereas the last 5-7 years, like if you saw a property come up, you had to have an offer in 24 hours or it's gone. Right. So I used to just line out like 20 properties, go out there and look at it. So it was super easy to find great deals, but it's never easy to find deals and finance them at the same time, typically. Right?
That's the irony.
Yeah, either the deals are hard or the money's hard. Usually it's one of the two. And so back then the deals were easy, but the money was hard. So what we did is we bought all cash. And now I didn't have the money, so that's how we got into syndication. So our first several deals, we bought them all cash, stabilized them, and then refinanced them out. Well, trying to do that in 2019 wasn't going to work.
Right.
So, after about 2 or 3 years, that's when we started buying properties with, agency debt or bank loans at 75% LTV loan. Bank would fund the rehab. So we're kind of at like 80, 90%. That worked great for a few years. I'd say starting in about 2020, we got a little concerned about pricing and a potential future increase in rates. So instead of going in at 75% loan value plus the bank funding the rehab, we dialed it back to 65% and will fund the rehab. Mm-hmm. So we continued to buy, but we lowered our leverage to hedge against what's actually happening right now.
Right, the changing interest rates.
So let me ask you that on too. As you brought more equity into those deals because you saw kind of the forecast of like, hey, we might, interest rates might creep up, pricing's at the height. What did that do to your investor returns? And did you feel pressure to like compete with like the Joneses, right? The syndication company over here that's throwing out the fat and sassy returns.
Yeah, that did become a challenge. So when we started, we used to pass on deals that had less than a 35% IRR. And wow. I look back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, we should have just bought it all. Not that we had the capability to, right? Because money was really hard to come by back then. So yeah, over the years, it dropped down to, I remember we changed the cutoff to 25 and then 21, and eventually we kind of settled around 14 to 15%. We also moved into lower risk properties. So the risk adjusted return was better. So yeah, so returns did come down over time, and how we still managed to make it work is good investor communication and investor education. Saying, look, the 25% IRR deals, those are gone. Now, we actually did end up still making a lot of those happen all the way up through 2020. But we stopped promising that because,
right.
It was getting more competitive. You did have to pay more. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other factors. And so, like you said, what would happen is like we're not promising, but our pro forma would say, okay, this is going to be a 14.4% IRR. And then the next guy puts out a pro forma that's like 18.5, and investors are like, well, wait a second, how, the return's going to be a lot more on this one. Like, well, you can put anything you want on paper, but can you actually execute and actually make it happen?
Right.
And so, yeah, that was a constant, just education of, and of, hey, markets changed, returns are coming down. Here is why we're putting in a 14.4, because we're not doing 90% leverage.
Mm-hmm.
We're not planning on selling in 2.5 years. We're not banking on 7% market rent growth every year for 5 years.
What?
All of those things that you could do to do financial engineering and make a pro
Right.
forma look great. We just had to educate people and say, hey, we're not going to do that. We have very high confidence in the numbers we are putting out.
Yeah.
But if you just put 5 pro formas on the table, it's not going to look sexy.
What was the feedback that you got as you educated people? Did people say, well, fine, I'll go where I can get those returns? Did people say, wow, I appreciate the rationale?
Did it click for them?
You never know what people are doing that they don't tell you about. But based on the growth that we've had in both new investors and our number one source of investors is actually, speaking on stage, podcast, whatever. Our second, and not by a far distance, our close second is referrals, meaning our existing investors referring in people that they know or friends or relatives or something like that. And so I think my sense of what happened with most of our investors and the feedback that I've got, and again, the negative people that didn't like it, they might have just unsubscribed and I never hear from them, right? So there could be some confirmation bias here. But the feedback that I got was like, hey, and especially nowadays, hey, you know what, we really appreciate that you're just taking a more conservative approach. Because I really don't want to lose my 100. So I like the fact that I'm going to get 14.5 hopefully with you. But I can sleep at night not worrying about, am I going to get the 100 back at the end? So I think my sense is it worked well, and we were just trying to tell everybody the truth too.
Yeah. Right.
It's to me, it's short term. Over promising is short term thinking. Yeah, you're going to get some extra deals done. You're going to raise some extra money, but then what happens 2 years from now when you're behind pro forma?
Yeah.
And you can't reach those numbers. Yeah, you already got the acquisition fee. Yeah, but now you've got a deal with a whole bunch of investors that aren't happy with you.
Right.
You got to deal with their justifiable unhappiness. Yep. And good luck with them reinvesting with you. So it's overpromising to me is short-term thinking. And we plan on doing this for another 10, 15, 20 years. So we just try to be really realistic.
Well, and I think tying this back to the persistence pays off, there's another word that dovetails with persistence, and it's discipline. And if you're going to be doing something for a long time and you're here to stay and you've got that long vision, you've got to be disciplined, right? So you strike me as a guy that would be a Jim Collins fan. Do you listen to any or read any Jim Collins?
It's been a long time.
Okay.
But I think you could put me in that category.
All right. Well, you got the engineering mind. So he seems so Jim Collins, I'm working through right now on Audible, Good by Choice. So he breaks down these 10X companies that had these competitors and how they outperformed these companies by 10 times. And he's got this pyramid, right? And each, for you geometry people out there, there's 3, points on a pyramid. So I had to walk myself through that. I'm like, shoot, which one? What would that be? Fanatic discipline.
Hexagon, pentagon.
Yeah, shoot. So he's got fanatic discipline, productive paranoia, and empirical creativity, right? So this idea of fanatic discipline is that you have the energy and the output, but it's tethered with this disciplined approach. And he has this term called a 20-mile march, right? So these companies had, growth by increments of 20% annually, where their competitive companies would be erratic. It'd be like 150% and 80%, and then it would fall 200%. And it's that idea that you're moving the chains forward incrementally. And oddly enough, in the good times, these companies didn't throw aside their discipline and get really ultra aggressive. They still had a formula and a buy box and returns that they were shooting for, a risk tolerance. So it sounds like you guys have used that discipline to continue to stay anchored in a crazy market over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy to do. I mean, I second guessed us a lot. I was like, okay, am I doing something wrong? Because, there's guys who started 3 years ago and they've already done as many units as I have in 7. And all these deals are trading hands. I'm like, okay, are we missing something? Like, how they went for this price and we wouldn't do it, but seems like 17 other people would. So, all right, is there something we're missing?
Yeah.
So, it's tough to do because you second guess yourself, and there's definitely the temptation there of, well, I mean, obviously you get the fees, you build the portfolio. Every time you do a deal, your name circulates everywhere, right? So,
Right.
It's tough to do that, and I did second guess for a while because, like I said, everyone else is just doing awesome.
Right.
But I'm telling you, I'm happy about it right now.
Well, now we're starting to see who didn't have the discipline and who didn't have the firm foundations, and we're kind of flying fast and loose, and are starting to pay for it. So
yeah, because I mean, like our current portfolio is rock solid. It's doing great. Does not have problems that everyone else is having, and we're still able to very selectively buy. And in fact, we're in the process of hiring people, gearing up so that when I think even more opportunities come in 24, we're ready to scoop them up and start the next cycle. So again, we try to look 10, 15 years out, and so far so good. So
yeah, we're going to jump into our smaller pockets segment.
I love the name of that.
So Andrew, why don't you go ahead and tell us about one of your worst deals in real estate, what went wrong, and then more importantly, what did you learn from it so we can apply it to our investing business?
A lot of our success in the last 8 years is due to what we learned on the deal that I'm going to tell you about. So this was, I want to say 2013. This was only somewhere in we've done 20 something syndications now. This was number 4, 5, or 6, something along those lines. We bought a very large 350 unit C- property in a rough part of Dallas. And it was definitely value add, and our goal was to renovate it and bump the rents, refinance, do all that. Well, the renovations were working. We did the renovations, and sure enough, we got the rent bumps we were expecting. But what we didn't factor in was just how rough that neighborhood was. And so we'd renovate a unit, we'd lease it. 6 months later, the tenants would stop paying rent. We'd have to evict them, and then they would destroy the unit. So we never got to just turn a unit. We had to renovate the unit every 6 months. And so the ongoing expenses were far higher than we anticipated. It also, and this is this property had everything, every aspect that you would never want. It had a chiller system, which means there's one giant air conditioning unit that runs the air for the entire 350 units.
For all 350 units.
In Texas.
So when that AC system goes down in August in Dallas, all 350 tenants don't have air conditioning.
It's like a purge.
Who's the genius that designed that? They're like, what if?
Well, that was the genius of the 1970s, when they thought that was the most efficient way to do it. And now, mind you, though, those pipes leak underground like crazy. We had regular shootings. We actually had somebody crawl on top of the leasing office in daylight, bust out the skylights, and throw Molotov cocktails into the leasing office to try to burn it down because they were upset because they were getting evicted because they stopped paying rent, right?
No. So that's a rough area of town.
And again, that was back before we did all of the demographic and income screening that we do now. It was a rough part of town. And so needless to say, we weren't at pro forma because the expenses of running the thing were far higher than we planned on. And then the headache factor was massive. Every time I got a phone call that was related to that property, it's just like, oh my gosh, what is it now? So, we had it for a couple of years. And then I don't know if you remember, but in 2015, everybody was convinced that a recession was coming in 2016. And I think Kiyosaki even put out a book predicting a massive crash in 2016. Of course, none of that actually happened, but it was pretty widely accepted that, I don't remember why, but hey, 2016 is going to be a recession. And so, I kind of sat back and said, well, if we persist at this property, I do think we can get it to the finish line and do well on it. However, in a recession, this type of property suffers the worst, suffers first and suffers the worst. And if we start having problems leasing and with occupancy and with revenue, we could get into trouble. And so Warren Buffett's number one rule is never lose money. Rule number two is seed rule number one. And so what we did is we had done it on a 5-year pro forma. We sold, I think it was 2.5 years in. And because we were able to get an offer that allowed us to return 100% of investor capital plus ended up being like a single digit return. That is the worst syndication that we've ever done. We've never lost money in a syndication. We've never done a capital call or anything like that. But that one definitely did not come anywhere close. And that was going back to the pivot, right? It was a matter of, okay, do we persist with this and get it to the finish line? And do we think we can? Yeah, we think we can. But there's a new risk developing, and that's a potential of a recession. If that happens, then that could be a huge failure. We have a whole lot of other people's money in this. So we said, you know what? Let's just say we made a mistake on this one. We're going to get out early. We're going to make sure everyone's at least whole, plus a small profit. And, we just said, we friends like, look, you know what? We underestimated the challenges of this. We want to make sure everyone is whole, and let's move on to more profitable ventures and with less risk. And, we had a couple of investors who, weren't happy and never invested with us again. But we also had quite a few who are like, hey, you know what? Understand and appreciate you protecting our capital. And, they've invested with us countless times since. So that's the worst syndication we've ever done.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. I'm sure the stress just melted off your shoulders after you sold that property.
Oh, yeah. That's part of why I'm half gray right now. So fortunately, the lighting's not that great and you can't see it as much. But.
Yeah. We've got high definition cameras over here. So. That's awesome, man. Well, let's go into our little nugget segment. All right, Andrew, what is one practical takeaway, piece of advice, could be a hack that our listeners can implement to their real estate investing businesses?
Yeah, I'd go back to kind of the theme of what we're talking about, just relentless persistence. There's no single little hack that's going to make it successful for you. I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but there's lots of little tips and tricks that you can add to what you're doing that the cumulative sum will be helpful. But if there's one thing to boil it down to, it's just that relentless persistence, which comes down to you. Yeah. And the good news is, that's difficult, but it's fully under your control.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That is very true. What's been one of the greatest resources for you in your career?
Other people and relationships. I wouldn't be able to spend the time, energy, and focus that I am able to do on this without having married the best wife ever for me. And then the mentors and people that I've met and connected with over the years. And in every aspect of it. Yes, my first mentor was somebody that I literally hired and paid to help us out, and that was worth every dollar. But all of the people since then that I count as mentors were just relationships that developed naturally by just being in the business, meeting people, talking to people, connecting. That has been absolutely key. And that's actually a challenge for me. I tend to be, I speak pretty easily on stage. And sometimes on podcasts, although I guess I'll let your listeners be the judge of that. But when it comes to the idea of going to a party and chatting with strangers, oh my gosh, that sucks the energy out of me, right? So it's not a natural thing for me to go out and network and connect. And I tend to be a bit of a lone wolf, and that I think has held me back over the years. And we'd probably be I consider us successful, but we'd probably be more successful, if I had learned those skills earlier on and done a better job with it. But with that said, the reason we're here is because of guys like our first mentor, Mike, and then, friend who became a mentor like Tim Rode, and then some of our partners, David and, David, Pat, and again, Tim, and some of the people who have joined our team over the last few years. I wish I could have brought them on earlier. So that's,
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is great. Lastly, in closing, man, how can people follow your success?
I am not of the Instagram and
You're not a
TikTok.
grammer, an influencer?
Yeah, no, I'm the anti-influencer. I'm not of the Instagram, TikTok generation, so you can search all you want. You're not going to find me on there. Best way to connect is if you Google my name or Vantage Point Acquisitions, our website, vpacq.com. There's a couple of tabs on the site that let people connect with us. And with that said, I am on LinkedIn and I post sporadically, but intend to increase that in the near future. So yeah, in terms of actually kind of following along, LinkedIn, Bigger Pockets. I don't announce deals. I don't say, hey, we closed, because so far everything we do is 506B, which is all that refers to is a SEC rule that says you can't solicit. And the SEC says, well, if you're talking about deals in public, they can consider that soliciting. So we don't do that, but I do try to post things about, hey, we're seeing this in the market, or, here's where we think things are going, or, these 3,200 units in Houston just got foreclosed on. What happened? That kind of stuff. So,
yeah. Awesome, man. Well, we'll put those in the show notes and the links to your website.
Yeah, we appreciate your time and for joining us on the show today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good talking to you guys. Always enjoy it. So
awesome.
As always, excited that you joined us on another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. If this episode added to your tool belt or left you feeling inspired, go ahead and share it with a friend. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch with us, go to our LinkedIn or Facebook profiles and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. See you next time.